This is my physiological psych class where I teach about addiction and I teach about the recovery from addiction and the therapies that are used in addiction recovery. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous, what is it? It is a non-professional group, and I went over this in class. If somebody tells you they're going to see their therapist in AA, they're not seeing their therapist in AA. AA is not a group that's run by any professional. There are doctors who are in AA as participants, maybe, but there's no doctor running an AA group. Now, there are thousands of AA groups all over the country at any given moment, running these wonderful meetings they have. And there are NA groups, Narcotics Anonymous. You have SA, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Marijuana Anonymous. Because the theory here is that all these different addictions have their own particular challenges. So when you have a patient who may have a marijuana problem, I think in my own work, I think I had one patient who was considered a marijuana addict. It was a very mild addiction. He had other issues. And he went to MA meetings because his complaint was when he goes into a room for Narcotics Anonymous and people are telling stories about their heroin addiction, drug overdoses, and just these really, really horrible stories that he can't identify with them at all. He's a pothead or a pot smoker. So that's often the case with the patients that you have, is when they are put in a room for recovery with people that don't share their background, they're going to have a hard time making friends. So the important thing as a therapist, or OT, PT, PA, NP, MD, whatever you're going to become, lawyer, working with people in some capacity, you have to know that and say, hey, I know NA didn't work for you 10 years ago, but try the MA group, that might help. Now, the way AA works is that you get into these groups and they're all organized. I think they have a secretary, they have people that plan the meetings out, very well organized, some of the groups, and you get there and there's some kind of a group leader and people go around and they share stories and they talk about challenges. And then they say a prayer, which is the Serenity Prayer at the end. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. They say a prayer at the end. Does that mean AA is religious? Well, not really, but it is a little. Now, AA started right here in New York City, I think right in my neighborhood, and what it was a group called the Oxford Group, and they met in the basement of a church, and they were a Christian men's group that would discuss their problems. So one person that started AA started with that particular group. I think that was Bill W. And there was another guy who started AA. It was started by a group of men who was a patient of Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst or analytical psychologist in Zurich. And Jung told him, basically, you have an alcohol addiction and your addiction is either going to kill you or you're going to have a spiritual transformation. So him, Bill W., the person who wrote the big book of AA, they got together and they formed this Alcoholics Anonymous. And they wrote their stories in a book, which people still read to this day. It's called The Big Book. It's the language is a little old. In my opinion, it's a little outdated. So when you go to an AA meeting, what's going to happen is you can participate or not. I encourage all my students to go to one meeting to see what it's like and to not participate if they don't want to. And somebody may approach you and say, hey, I don't know what you're going through, but whatever it is, we've all been there before. And if you need help, you can get a sponsor. And I'm a sponsor, and I'm happy to help you when the time is right. AA sponsors, and I've had a lot of experience in different mental health positions, vary, but many of them are excellent. And they will go to, they'll go to different social events with a person. They'll go to a hospital with a person if they relapse. They'll advocate for the person. They'll give a person's history to a doctor, to a counselor. They'll sometimes be a person's only form of social support. So AA has this sponsor system A sponsor, though, is not a professional. It's not a mental health professional in any capacity. And that's why it's important to know the role of the sponsor and to know how to interact with them as a mental health professional. Now, a sponsor might be a mental health professional, but that doesn't mean they are one in their capacity as a sponsor. Very important. So if you think a sponsor is a mental health professional, you're wrong. If a sponsor presents themselves as a mental health professional, that's not right. And you have to know that. Now, AA doesn't have any kind of therapy associated with it. AA doesn't produce therapists. It doesn't have therapists overseeing things. AA has a process called the 12 steps, which are really kind of psycho-spiritual. They cover the psychology and the spiritual and the social aspects to get a person to recover, to get them into this recovery mode. And the 12 steps are like admitting that you have a problem with alcohol and that it took over your life and you can't really do anything about that, but if you kind of give up control of that problem and let others help you, that you can start to the process of recovery and go back to the people you harmed and make amends with them. There's a whole process in the 12 steps, and then help others, and that's a great intelligence system. And if you have no addiction problems, you can take those 12 steps and apply them to any problem in your life, and it's a really intelligent system. Now, there is a kind of therapy called 12-step facilitation therapy. 12-step facilitation therapy, which is where a therapist will be familiar usually with the 12 steps and will help a person through those 12 steps. That therapist will be a mental health professional, which includes drug and alcohol counselor. Generally speaking, somebody who does 12-step facilitation therapy most likely would have been through a 12-step program themselves. They may still be in the 12-step program. They probably believe very much in the 12 steps. They're not particular to any religion. And I tell my students this all the time. If you are an Orthodox Jew, go to an Orthodox Jewish AA group. If you're a Christian, go to a Christian AA group, or go to Celebrate Recovery, which is another Christian group that does AA. If you're a yoga atheist, go to the yoga atheist group. In New York City, you can find 10 of them, I'm sure. And find the group that's right for you. If a group is too religious, a lot of times I hear from students, oh, my uncle went to AA, I went to one meeting and it was so religious it turned me off. If that's too religious, that's not the group for you. There are thousands of other AA groups. Go to a Muslim group, go to a Christian group, go to whatever group you want to go to. Go to a gay lesbian group, go to a transgender group, go to a group that speaks Malayalam, go to a group that speaks Thai. There is always going to be an AA group for you, and they're all around the world, which is what's so cool about AA. I've known people that I lived in Japan, so I've known people that lived in Japan and attended AA meetings in Japan because they could. They could, and they can get the books in Japanese, and if they saw somebody had a problem, they'd give them a book. And if I knew people that worked in Europe, and there were some very famous American AA meetings in Paris years ago, with some very famous people in them. But they're a very, 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 very good network. And Mark Gallanter, who addictionologist at NYU, who did a lot of research on AA, came to the conclusion, more or less, in one of his books on the subject and many of his articles, that AA is the kind of social support network that people need to help support them in their change. So in this class, I talk about systems theory. That's the fact that we are not just a person isolated from the world. We're connected to everything. What we do affects other people. What other people do affects us. We also talked about ecological psychology, Bronfenbrenner. We're not just an individual. We have a family, a group, a macrosystem, microsystem, mesosystem, chronosystem. So AA is that kind of support component that's vital in addiction recovery. Gallanter really didn't say that the actual 12 steps were what really helped people, but it was more his kind of qualitative ethnographic research he did with AA groups, he said that the social support is what people need. And actually, when people join different groups, organizations, religions, that's often what they're looking for. And AA provides a really great outlet for that. So that's my wrap up of AA. That covers everything I've ever covered in class about AA, and I hope it was a help to you. So remember, the brain is not isolated. The brain is part of a body, that's part of a system, that's part of a personality, a family, a society. So when we change our brains, we also have to change things in our environment. When we change things in our environment, we change our brains. One is not isolated from the other. Studying physiological psychology means studying therapy, studying medicine, studying OT, PT, different types of interventions. Take care, bye.